So in the beginning, just to think about ways of looking and ways of sharing this exhibition. The exhibition looked at not only portraiture, but also acts of social protest, and also looking for ways to identify subjects. Entering in this exhibition, we're, the first photographs you'll see is the image here on the right, and you'll see Matthew Brady and his studio, the Matthew Brady studio, of a photographer taking a photograph of a couple. And let's see as we walk through this. It's always a moment. Uh, we have titles for the different sections, spaces, and places. And as I mentioned, it is composed of idealized portraits, also photographs of activism and social justice, also private moments and thinking about life and spirituality. What do we think about leisure life and beauty? What do we think about the inner self? And as we walk through this exhibition. So entering into the studio, we first enter into a 19th century moment where we see photographer directing a young couple. It excited me to see this image in the collection because we all know Matthew Brady through his photographs of the Civil War. And yes, he has photographs in the collection of portraits of Civil War generals as well as presidents. This to me humanizes him in a different way. And I wanted to just kind of have the energy of this moment where we see a young couple from the 19th century, where we see fashion, we see a moment where the pose is telling a story about love and the permanence of love or the permanence of a relationship. We also see that the photographer creates a studio with art on the wall. And that's another way of experiencing how the photographer is experiencing the moment of 19th century photography. James Van Der Zee is also in this section. And just to let you know, the images are not on the wall presented chronologically, but in terms of what images speak to each other. They're in conversation with moments. The first couple, the couple in the car, James Van Der Zee, well-known photographer in Harlem, photographed a couple in 1932 in their car, fur coat, Cadillac, brownstones in the back. So we begin to see community. We see the importance of possession. And as I imagine the couple in telling their story, that imagine if this image was sent to a family member in the Caribbean or in the South or out West, to imagine life in Harlem. Here we are, we've arrived, we're safe, we're living life, we're living the good life. And but we see the style, we see the imagination of the couple, and we see a future. If I received that photograph in 1932 during the Depression, a sense of hope. There's a collection of heiress in this collection as well. But Van Der Zee photographed a woman who inherited an apartment of a woman that she worked for in Harlem in the 1920s and 30s. These are three scenes, and I just wanted to show the different ways that Van Der Zee was able to create a monument to the previous owner, but also to celebrate the current owner. And we see her as the heiress. We see the piano, we see the jewelry, as well as the furniture and the way that her life is presented. The three-folded mirror and the satin, silk, and lace that we walk through this experience. So Van Der Zee is allowing us into a home of Harlem, into a home of a woman who's created a narrative about her life and invited the photographer in to help guide her story. And here's Van Der Zee. This is not in the collection, but I just wanted to show his face and his time during his time, but also others walking into the studio on Lenox Avenue. August Sander, another photographer in the collection, and also well known 1930s, working at the same time in another country, in Germany. And these are circus workers, artists, and a moment that he captures them um, at rest as they're taking a break. But we see an integrated couple, we see an integrated group, we see women who decided to take an action about their artistry, that they've decided that as opposed to living a life in their hometowns, that they wanted to travel to the world. And traveling the world meant becoming a circus artist. And here we see one woman who's up in the back in the doorway. He framed nicely, about to take a bite to eat. The woman at the bottom of the steps, just looking directly into the camera. All of them feel that energy that Sander brings to their narrative of moving through the world. We see fashion, we see workers, we see people just kind of looking through the lens of their future. And Dorothea Lange's photograph of Migrant Mother, another 1930s, another life. California, the Depression, a mother raising children, and the moment that she's captured. What's happening here, this has been relationships over the years connecting to Madonna and child. We see a mother in terms of independence and dependent. We see different relationships over the years through the scholarship of this image. And to recognize that the Kalamazoo Institute of Art has collections that are vast, that are in some of the major museums in this country and around the world. And here's an installation shot of as we enter into the gallery. Different ways of looking. We see Gordon Parks next to the image of Dorothea Lange. Gordon Parks also working in the 40s in Washington, D.C., one of the first Black photographers to be hired for the Foreign Security Administration photographs, photographing not only this woman, Ella Watson, but photographing in the community of Washington, D.C. He wanted to photograph injustices and how to express that best. And this is one of the first photographs that he made that was not published during its time period, because the director Roy Stryker said, "You will get us all fired in terms of this." But he wanted to create an iconic moment, referencing Grant Wood's image, but also referencing the hard work of this woman, Ella Watson, who was raising her grandchildren and her adopted daughter. Her husband had been deceased, and she lost a daughter. So we see a broom and a mop. We also see the American flag, and framing that, the seriousness with the pin that closes her dress talks about her modesty. And that's something that is presented in this image here. Bill Brandt, as we think about workers, domestic workers, the parlor maids in England, and also the maid in the office building, government office building in Washington, D.C. We see the uniforms of these young women, one younger, one older. We see the well framed table and made up table, wine, and we see the sense of class and the experience that he, the photographer, British photographer, is presenting within that narrative. Diane Arbus in 1964, Flower Girl at Wedding. Um, how do we work through this mist? It's a beautiful image of a young girl who's lost in the mist of this moment. She's the flower girl. We don't see the experience of the wedding, but we know from the title. We also know from the basket that she's holding. And to find a way to connect that to the exhibition, wanted to share how we are installing the show, how we installed the show, but to have ways of walking through photographers who were well known in the larger pantheon of photography, but also in the local photography history of Michigan, and their images here on the wall. Shelby Lee Adams, a Texan photographer who was photographing brothers praying in 1993. Um, the gesture in this image warms my heart as we begin to see the connection of the two men. Their heads touch. The Bible is open. They're praying. They're praying hands, and their sense of hope has not been lost based on how the photographer made this image by Dolores Pinzo of Catwoman, Minerva. Wonderful moment of energy of a nanny. So we see three workers during this exhibition, from a chambermaid or a charwoman, as Gordon Parks describes Ella Watson, to a nanny, to the parlor maids. And we see the different style of dress. We see the uniforms of the time, but we also see this wonderful moment of a woman who works as a nanny and in that experience. Another installation shot, as you'll see. Andy Warhol is also in this exhibition, The Little Red Book. He had a few little red books that he created Polaroid images in a bound album, small bound album of friends, musicians, and artists. And they exchanged photographs. They moved the camera and shared with each other moments of their relationships. And these are some of the images from that album. Lawrence Saltzman, a photographer in Philadelphia, and we see an aspect of this hand. What does this hand mean? Is it a sense of hope or resilience? Is it praying or stop? So we have a way of looking at this image through multiple experiences through Lawrence Saltzman. And the image on the left in the frame of this exhibition is the pedestal where the Andy Warhol's images are placed.